Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
A dark fog wafts in through the trees, slowly covering the forest floor. It approaches the smoldering fire, worn down after hours of granting light and heat. The four mercenaries, making light-hearted conversation, are slow to notice the change in their surroundings. Then all at once, the light goes out. As total darkness covers the sight, panic and threats can both be heard, thrown out directionless into the night. A slender human screams as something below the fog surface touches his leg. A laugh, faint yet blood-curdling, fills any gaps in sound. An orc, tall, well-built, and wielding a maul, suddenly loses all color in her face before she takes off screaming into the forest, magic forcing fear into her heart. A dwarf, sturdy and alert, succumbs further to the darkness, becoming paranoid as crystal blue eyes peer up from near his feet. Bolts of magical energy begin to soar from the forest's edge, striking one cowardly mercenary after another, downing some and convincing others that living is the wiser option. As only one remains, gripped in fear, a figure, fog-wrapped and imposing, clears the forest and approaches. With smile clear and eyes unflinching, the witch, with familiar now in tow, clears the sight of life with a final slash of his steely nails. Welcome back, adventurers. Today, we talk about the witch. The witch is an intelligence-based full caster with 6 hit points per level. They get trained in simple weapons, but no armor at all. They're also trained in 3 plus intelligence modifier number of skills, and a skill based on your subclass or patron. Witches are also experts in will saves, but trained in everything else, meaning perception and the other 2 saves. Given the base stats, it means you're going to be great at things like crafting, alchemy, solid at recall knowledge with a whole bunch of skills, including lore skills, and you're best to stay out of melee, given the fact that you just don't have a lot of hit points and 0 armor training at all. The witch has 4 key level 1 features and turns we need to discuss, but nothing at higher levels that's outside the norm in any terribly important way. The first feature and most important is spellcasting, of course, being a full caster. The witch is a prepared caster, right? So this means that you choose exactly what fills every spell slot you have available to you. If you put heal in that level 1 spell slot, you have to use that level 1 spell slot you chose for heal. You're also going to have a spell book of sorts, but it's your familiar. So the familiar from your patron is your spell book, and you're going to have more spells known than you have spells prepared. The familiar will start with 4 abilities, though, one of which is a special ability granted by your patron, so this is more than a regular familiar gets, which is really nice. Also, you're going to have 10 cantrips that you learn, and 5 level 1 spells that you learn, all at level 1. So those are the ones you'll have in your spell book, if you will, your familiar will know, and then from those you will prepare the number in the table from the book. Outside of those 5 level 1 spells, you're also going to have 1 level 1 spell from your patron. If your familiar dies, it comes back during daily preparations, unlike normal familiars, which take longer than that. As I read it, if your familiar dies, though, you don't lose everything around spellcasting. So you might be afraid, oh, I have to be worried that if it dies, I won't be able to cast any more spells. No, it's just, the familiar contains all of this knowledge about the spellcasting, but, you prepare them from it. So you don't need it in order to cast. So that's all pretty straightforward. Is that all there is with the casting? No. Hexes are the other thing. So hexes are part of the spellcasting for witches, and there's a couple types of hexes. There are hex cantrips and hex spells. Both of these fall within the kind of focus spell area, but hex cantrips don't use a focus point to use, because they are cantrips. The hex trait means that you can only use 1 per turn, so you can't use a hex cantrip and a hex spell on the same turn. They're both hexes, only 1. You will get a hex cantrip from your patron, but hex spells you can take by taking feats from the class. We'll get a little bit more into that. So these hex spells then. They are focus spells that use focus points. The first one you're going to get for free at level 1, and they relate to your familiar. There's two options. There's Patron's Puppet, which is a free action to command your familiar. Because remember that a familiar can only take actions on your turn if you use an action of yours to command it. This gives you a free action to command it. And then there's Phase Familiar, which is a reaction you can use when your familiar takes damage to resist that damage, which is really helpful to keep your familiar alive. You will get more hex spells available to you by taking feats at level 2, 6, and 10. These are not tied to your patron though, so you can take whichever ones you like that fit your playstyle best. Okay, so we've talked about all that. What do we have left? Well, we have the subclass, or Patron. What does the Patron give you? Well, this is interesting because similar to another class we haven't talked about, the Sorcerer, your spell tradition is actually going to change based on your subclass. So in this case, your Patron will give you a spell tradition, a skill training. You're going to get your Hex cantrip, a level 1 spell that, like we talked about, just one available you can use for your spell slots. And then you get a familiar ability that is very special to you or the subclass, nobody else can get. And it is always going to be triggered whenever you use or sustain a Hex spell or cantrip. All right, so let's go ahead and run through what those patrons are real quick. And I'm not going to go too deep. We're just going to talk about them really quickly because, of course, in the ranking video, we're going to get much more in depth. Baba Yaga, rare. This gives you occult casting. You get occultism as your skill. You get the Hex cantrip Spirit Object, which brings an object to life that can fight with you. You get the level 1 spell Chilling Spray added to your known spells for level 1, and the familiar ability creates a 5-foot burst in one of the corners of the square it's in, and enemies that enter this 5-foot burst are dazzled until your next turn. We got Choir Politic. This is a divine spell tradition. You get Society as your skill. You get the Hex cantrip Share Vision, which is a 10-minute shared vision with a friend. You get the level 1 spell Share Lore added, and the familiar ability gives +2 status bonus to the next non-attack skill check an adjacent ally makes. Then we've got the Kobe Slarney? I don't know how to say that. Rare. This is again occult with occultism. Your Hex cantrip is Information Overload. This forces a will save on an enemy or it becomes stupefied 1. You get the spell Deja Vu added to your list, and your familiar gets a free recall knowledge whenever you cast or use or sustain a Hex cantrip or spell. Then we have Devourer of Decay. This gives you the primal spell tradition and the nature skill. You get the Hex cantrip Scrounger's Glee. This forces a will save or the creature becomes frightened 1, and it can't go away as long as you keep sustaining the spell. Also, you can use a reaction to dismiss it when an ally crits this creature that you've hit with it, and the ally will get healed a little bit. You get Enfeeble added to your spells, and your familiar ability is 1 creature in 15 feet that is bloodied must make a fort save or be sickened 1. We have Faith's Flamekeeper. This is a divine spell tradition with religion. You get Stoke the Heart Hex cantrip. Creature in 30 feet gains a status bonus to damage rolls, so an ally. This adds Command to your spell list, and your familiar ability, 1 ally in 15 feet gains temporary hit points for 1 round. Mosquito Witch, primal spellcasting. You get the nature skill. Your Hex cantrip is Buzzing Bite. This is slight damage to 1 creature in 30 feet, and on a crit fail, then they become sickened. You gain Pest Form onto your spell list, and your familiar gives concealment to any ally sharing its space for a turn. Paradox of Opposites is a divine tradition. You get religion skill, and you get Trade Death for life. This deals 1d4 damage on a fort save to a creature, and if that creature takes damage, you give 1 ally fast healing 1 while you sustain the spell. You add Sleep to your spell list, and the familiar makes 1 creature in 20 feet stupefied 1 until next turn. Then we have Ripple in the Deep. This is primal nature skill again. You get Sting of the Sea. 1 creature in 30 feet must make a fort save against being dazzled or potentially even blinded on a crit fail. The level 1 spell added is Dizzying Colors, or you can add Grease. You actually get choices here. And the familiar ability, your familiar pushes a creature within 10 feet of it, 5 feet away. Silence in Snow. This is another primal with a nature skill. You get Clinging Ice. It's a small amount of cold damage and then movement reduction on a reflex save. You get Gust of Wind added to your spell list, and your familiar creates a 5-foot burst in a corner of its square that becomes difficult terrain until next turn. Spinner of Threads, this is Occult with the Occultism skill. You get the Nudge Fate cantrip, which gives a 1-minute boost to an ally. As long as you sustain it, gives them a +1 to a failed check if that check would change the outcome from either failed to success or crit fail to fail. You get the Sure Strike spell added to your spell list, and the familiar ability gives a creature in 15 feet either a +1 to AC or a -1 to AC. Starless Shadow, this is Occult with Occultism. The Shroud of Night Hex cantrip forces a will save on a creature in 30 feet, changing light as they see it, so it'll affect the way that they see all the light around them, and making all creatures concealed to it on a fail. You get Fear added to your spell list, and Familiar, if adjacent to a creature it's concealed to or hidden from, that creature is now frightened 1, just from your Familiar being next to it. The Inscribed one, this is an Arcane tradition, this is the first one we've had, with the Arcana skill. You get Discern Secrets Hex cantrip. This gives one creature in 30 feet the ability to recall knowledge, seek, or sense motive as a free action with a +1 status bonus to the check. You get Runic Weapon added to your spell list, and the Familiar is able to flank with you and your allies until next turn. The Resentment, this is Occult with Occultism. You get the Evil Eye Hex cantrip. You choose one creature in 30 feet to make a fort save or become sickened 1, and they can't be reduced below sickened 1 while the spell is active. You also get Enfeeble added to your spell list, and your familiar ability is the Familiar curses a creature within 15 feet to prolong all negative conditions it has on it for another round. The Unseen Broker, this is Occult with Occultism. You get Pact Broker as the Hex cantrip. This is a will save against 2d4 mental damage and a -1 penalty to attacks and damage rolls. You get the command spell added, and your familiar ability, the Familiar chooses a creature in 10 feet that becomes off guard. Whisper on Wings, this is primal with the nature skill. You get Murmuration. You make a creature make a will save each time it moves closer to a second designated creature on a turn, taking sonic damage or piercing damage on a fail. And then you get Gentle Landing added to your spell list, and your Familiar can fly up to 15 feet. Then you get Wilding Steward. This is primal with nature. You get Wilding Word. One creature in 30 feet must make a will save or take penalties, including sickened when attempting to attack or use a skill against you. You get either Summon Animal or Summon Plant or Fungus added to your spell list, and your Familiar gains an imprecise sense out to 60 feet and can point out a creature as a free action. Yes, that is a lot of different subclass options. It's going to be a heck of a ranking video. Ooh, all right, so now we understand the basics of the class. We've talked about your choices for subclass. Let's get into the feats, starting with all the level 1 feats and a couple choice ones at higher levels. Cackle, level 1. You get the level 1 focus spell, Cackle, which provides you a free action sustain of a spell, and this is a hex itself, so it helps you sustain for free, but it does cost you that focus point. Cauldron, level 1. You gain 4 recipes for level 1 potions or oils. You get another at every 2 levels after level 2 with a recipe for that level. You get 1 free item per day, 2 at level 15, and 3 at level 19. So get some nice free potions, but also just a lot more to crafting if you want to go crafting. Counterspell, which is a very common one. This is a reaction, level 1. You attempt to counteract a spell you have prepared when cast by a different creature. So if you have a spell slot with fear in it, somebody casts fear, you can try to counteract their fear because you got fear prepared, all that. Reach spell, again, standard for casters, level 1, 1 action. This just helps you increase the reach of one of the spells you cast. Can be really great if you want to use melee spells against a ranged creature. Widen spell, again, common. These are more spell shapes. 1 action, it just increases the length of a line, how big a cone is, how big a burst is, things like that. Witch's Armaments, level 1. You gain one of the following, either slashing claws that are D6 agile on armed attack, or you can get Jaw, which is a D8 piercing damage, or your Hair, which is D4 bludgeoning, agile, finesse, trip, and disarm. So very different options. You can grab one of those. There's also Wart Witch, level 1. Your familiar is Leshy, and there's no checks to attack creatures concealed by vegetation in case you feel like you're going to be in a forest setting the whole time. So that's all of our level 1 feats. At level 2, we have Basic Lesson. This lets you choose one of 6 focus spells. There are also greater and major versions of this at level 6 and 10, so this is how you get more focus spells, and they're good. I highly recommend looking at the lessons. Double Double, this is level 10, requires having Cauldron. You get 2 bottles of each free daily potion that you make, so you're going to make a lot more potions out of Cauldron. Again, it's still not a huge number, but it does help you if you want to try to get free potions every day. And Patron's Presence, this is level 14, takes 2 actions and is once per hour. You create a 15-foot emanation around your familiar, and creatures that enter or start there must make a will save against becoming stupefied 2 or stupefied 3 on a crit fail as long as they stay in there, and it can be sustained up to 1 minute. All right, with all those basics handled, let's go ahead and dive into our class breakdown graph. This is a caster with a lot to do. You'll have all kinds of options because you can choose any spell tradition. On top of that, you can choose your own 3 focus spells from, levels 2, 6, and 10 feats. There's a lot of versatility in that as well. The one thing that I would hesitate to do on here is gish it up too much, just because you don't have any armor training and you don't have a lot of hit points. But the feats do exist if you want to do that, so you don't have to avoid that. All in all, this is set up to give you all kinds of options while you're in combat. So yeah, it's definitely a 5. You've just got so many options at your fingertips at all times. You can always choose spells, a subclass, and focus spells that are single target damage focused, but it's probably not the strongest way to build your character. No matter how you build, you won't deal the kind of damage that a melee martial would, or even focused ranged martial can, and if you focus on it, you probably lose a lot of versatility. Not bad as casters to go, but just a 2 because you really won't hit as hard as even a Gish would, like say an animist Gish. So I don't recommend dealing that direction, but you can. AoE damage though is very strong. It would be better or worse depending on the spell tradition that you take. Not too many of the hex cantrips or familiar abilities or lessons are AoE based, but they do exist. It doesn't reach the heights that we've seen with some casters like sorcerers, or a class like the Kineticists, so I gotta go ahead and give this a 4, but it's definitely something you can do well. Support is similar to AoE, but it's also going to depend heavily on which subclass you go with. There are great options for it. There are focus spells and subclasses that are built well for it. Honestly, a lot of the support ones are actually quite strong, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a 5 because some of our strongest subclasses are support witch subclasses. So we're just going strength after strength here. In my opinion, though, control is really where a witch stands out. Many of the best focus cantrips, focus spells, familiar abilities, these focus on control itself, single target, AoE, all kinds of debuffs, great battlefield control. This is easily a 5, in my opinion. And then finally, we have survivability, with 6 hit points per turn, no armor training, and no increased movement speed or other survivability tools. You aren't sitting pretty here. Having a familiar to potentially take some focus from you is something, I guess, but you don't really want it to die. And of course, you can take healing and temporary HP features. Anyway, this is going to land at a 2 because there are ways you can take, certain subclasses or spells to keep yourself going and keep yourself alive, but you're going to be in trouble if you get too deep into combat with, say, melee creatures. For most builds, you likely want to be the strongest caster you can be with some survivability, but you might want a few options. So let's talk about a few different build options you can go with. The first is kind of your standard full caster. I stay away from everybody and I make sure to keep myself safe at all times with high int, dex, con, and wisdom, with some charisma and strength left at just baseline. However, if you want to be a full caster with getting some face time in there, meaning face the party action, you could go an int charisma build with con and dex for a little survivability in there, and then drop strength and wisdom. Again, you're going to be a little easier to take out because you won't have that high AC with the low dexterity, keeping in mind, of course, you don't have a great way to do armor. So just think about that. But if you really want to be face the party, I think this is very doable. Just be very careful and stay away in combat. And then if you really want to get shit up, because you have things, like we saw where you can take a feat at level 1 that gives you melee unarmed strikes, all of that, you can. So in that case, you're still going to want to go int, dex, comp, and I will throw strength in there to do a little bit more damage. Make sure to use finesse weapons when you're doing this. And then, okay, you might be able to get in there, and I'm sure there's some great Gish players out there who love their witches, who would have lots to tell me about being a Gishy witch. So let's go ahead and throw together a level 1 build, and then talk about what that looks like in combat. So what would my build be? Would I have a weapon? No. Armor? Not happening. What are my stats? Well, I'm going to go ahead and go +4 in int, +3 in dex, 1 in con, and 1 in wisdom, that kind of standard caster setup. I'll go ahead and take the Patron Starless Shadow as an example here. As for my prepared cantrips, I'll have Guidance, Shield, Figment, Phase Bolt, and Haunting Hymn, some support, some defensive stuff here. We've got, of course, some damage cantrips. As for rank 1 spells, I'm going to go ahead and have Fear prepared. We get that one for free with our patron, but I'd probably take it anyway because it's Fear. And then Command and Dizzying Colors. We're going to go on the control side here. As far as focus spells, I'm going to go ahead and take Patron's Puppet in case I need a free action to move my familiar around. And we have Shroud of Night, which is our Hex cantrip that we get from our patron. And we have the familiar abilities. Remember, we get 4. So I'm going to go ahead and take Familiar of Stalking Night. That's not a take, that's what you get for your patron. So that's the free ability that it gets. We're going to take Fast Movement, Independent, and Familiar Focus. So I want to talk real quickly about Independent. And this might vary table to table. It's literally written in there that it might vary by GM. Independent, let your familiar move on your turn on its own, so you don't have to give an action. As a, it's not a free action thing. It's just if you don't command it, it can still move once on your turn. Why is this so important for witches? Well, a lot of the abilities that you want to use when you cast hex cantrips, hex spells, or sustain a hex, they trigger when your familiar is close to either allies or enemies, so you need to have your familiar up in the fray to some extent, which means normally you'd have to keep using an action every turn to move it around. Now it gets 2 actions, which is great. It has an ability it can use as well. But if you have Independent, it's allowed to move once on its own, and the familiar ability that it's got is generally just triggered. It's not something you have to actually do. So having it up next to a creature is actually really important, and that's why I think it's best if you've got your familiar with Independent able to move once around so that it can stay where it needs to get the most advantage from its special familiar ability. GMs out there, I recommend you let players just command where their familiar goes if it has Independent. Technically, as a GM, you could say that you are deciding where it goes, but given that this is a patron, the patron's granting you this familiar, right? It's this kind of connected thing you've got going on here, and obviously giving your witch the power it does. Your patron's going to want the witch to succeed, I would assume. So I would think it would want the familiar to go where the witch wants it to go. That's kind of how I look at it. It's very special to witches, this one in particular. That's why I think Independent's really important. I just wanted to make a call out for it. All that being said, let's go ahead and jump into a combat example to show off witch gameplay. A group of playful sprites, somehow displaced from their home plane, have decided to prank a small town. Unfortunately, these pranks have drifted into dangerous territory and are escalating quickly. Feeling their presence, a pair of adventurers skilled in such matters has made their way to town to intercede. Nomi, the witch, knows these creatures well enough and lets Jeb, her guardian companion, know. The two make a game plan and, when the time is right, they strike. The sprites have been well aware of them, and despite being in the middle of lighting the local saloon on fire, they stop to meet their attackers head-on. All parties roll initiative. Jeb leads the way and rushes up to a pair of sprites with the matches. Unfortunately, it takes 2 actions for him to cover the distance, and with his final action, in order to help keep both himself and Nomi safe, he uses Shielding Taunt, raising his shield and taunting the third sprite. One of the pyromaniacs then takes its turn and blasts Jeb with Dizzying Colors. Jeb manages to succeed at the saving throw, but he is still dazzled for a round. The sprite finishes its turn by attempting to stab Jeb with its tiny rapier, but hits nothing at all. Now it's Nomi's turn. Thanks to the Independent ability, her familiar, Huff, is able to use 1 action without being commanded, which it uses to stride up to the sprite that just took its turn, knowing what Nomi has in mind. Then, because she can see and is in range of the sprite, uses her hex cantrip, Shroud of Night, on the sprite who already acted. It fails, and now all creatures are concealed to it. Because Huff is adjacent to it, the sprite is now also frightened thanks to the special ability from the Patron. So, frightened 1, and with her last 2 actions, Nomi casts Fear on the other sprite adjacent to Jeb. The sprite critically fails its save, becoming frightened 3 and fleeing for a round. This brings us to the fleeing sprite, who takes off immediately. We'll see him later, maybe. Finally, the separated sprite has come up in order. It first moves to a better position. Nomi, seeming like the more concerning threat, becomes the target of the sprite's wrath. But because it has been taunted, when the sprite uses its second and third actions to cast Daze on Nomi, it will take a -1 penalty to the save DC and become off guard. Thanks to the reduced DC, Nomi succeeds at the save, taking only half damage, in this case 2 mental damage. This brings us back around to Jeb. Still dazzled, Jeb decides to go after the off-guard sprite. He uses 1 action to rush over and strikes. After rolling a 7 on the flat check, which allows him to attack, he manages a critical strike against the reduced AC of the sprite, annihilating it. For a final action, he taunts the currently hexed sprite. The frightened and taunted sprite decides to attempt to daze Jeb, but thanks to being frightened 1 and the reduced spell save DC, Jeb critically succeeds the save, and the sprite moves away from Huff. Tired of this, Nomi moves in range and fires a phase bolt. She lands the attack, dealing 3d4 damage for a total of 9, taking the sprite out. The fleeing sprite, seeing his comrades in the dirt, decides fleeing was a blessing and just keeps going. Jeb and Nomi take this chance to ensure it won't return as the sun slowly falls. As a witch, yes, you are an intelligent caster, so you could lean into the archetypes, the multi-class archetypes, that also take advantage of it, such as Alchemist, Inventor, or Psychic. If you want to go the Gish route, I would recommend taking a high dex path, as we talked about, and then grabbing something like Exemplar or Swashbuckler could be a really good way to go. If you plan to use Hex cantrips and other spells each turn, it may be difficult to fit in any other actions, as your Hex cantrips or sustaining them do take an action, so think about that when you're looking at any kind of multi-class choices you want. You're not going to want ones that are very action intensive. If instead you look at the Hex cantrips and spellcasting as options separate from each other to increase your tactical flexibility, then adding in further options from multi-class archetypes to make you a greater threat, and yeah, make you difficult to account for. So think about all the options you can bring in by just taking different angles to add to the many things you can already do. And there we go. That is The Witch. What do you think? Are you excited to play one? Have you played one before? What has your experience been? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, adventure on.